The past 2 weeks have been a lot of learning on my behalf, a lot of time of learning, a lot of time of growing. Unless you're a visitor for the very first time, everyone pretty much knows my father passed away on September 26th. And we buried his body on Tuesday of this week. And I thank those that sent cards, that sent flowers, that have texted, and every other imaginable thing that someone would do at a time like this. I'm very sorry that I didn't call upon the church to feed us. There's a good reason behind that. And the reason is that when my mother came home on Sunday afternoon 2 weeks ago, I was informed by her church of the menu that would be coming into the house throughout the week. I said, okay. Mind you, my mother's church, which she's up here in the front, she doesn't want any recognition, so no one look. Her church is a lot of, I don't want to say old because you're not old, but you may have old-fashioned ways. But when it comes to taking care of people during times of crisis and things like that, they can step up and do a lot. It's not to say that I didn't want to call on this church, and I know above everything this church has been praying for a very long time for both me and my mother and my father. I just didn't get a chance to call because another church stepped in and just was like, here's the food. Every night, I think at about 6 o'clock, somebody was knocking at the door with 2 or 3 dishes, and we tried to get people to eat with us because she usually doesn't eat very much, but she's eaten a little bit less since her surgery, and I've started eating a little bit less. No comments about that one. But we could get through maybe about a half of whatever they brought, but then the next night there would be something else, so it was kind of a fight to keep the refrigerator from exploding. But actually, trying to go back to what I wrote and not what I'm just trying to say and what I'm trying to cover. September 26th is the legal day my father passed away. And now I'll go ahead and show the slide that I accidentally showed earlier when I was trying to play with the foot pedals. And in Memoriam is supposed to be Latin. I thought it was something that was a different prefix before Memoriam. I looked on my phone, but as it takes 2 or 3 minutes to load every line while I'm at the church, I just went with what it said. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But on September 26th, they pronounced my father had passed away from heart-related issues. And he was battling multiple injuries, multiple illnesses, and basically what it is that a heart couldn't keep up with what he had. So we got to the hospital about 12:30 a.m. He had already been pronounced passed, but we were there till 6 a.m. waiting for a coroner and the funeral home to come and take his body to be kept. At 6 a.m. that morning, I and my mother walked into our house. I turned around to the few ladies, I believe it was my mother's best friend, that had followed us home in case I wasn't driving too well. And holding on to the corner, I said, I've got to go to bed. And so I did. I passed out for 6 hours. I didn't know that at 7 a.m., an hour later, my mother was taken out of the house on a stretcher, suffering from a heart attack. At 1 o'clock, or at least it should have been 1 o'clock that I got there, but as you know, when things happen that are not the best in the world, things get in your way. This time it was pest control. I'm just like, just do the outside, fine, fast, sorry, but I'm going to the hospital. And when I got there, I was told by a doctor, kind of to my mother's surprise and my surprise, that she had suffered a critical heart attack. And the operation for it should have been open heart surgery because she had 6 stents placed in her heart in the areas around her heart. But the doctors, knowing the situation that she was already in, did their best to do it another way, and she has come through it. She's healing well. I'm trying very hard to keep up with her to keep her from overdoing it, but it's hard. I may have to pause a little bit for water here and there. And eventually some of this will start to make sense as an actual sermon or a statement. Maybe not a sermon, but eventually I'll get to a statement. But I felt like recounting this was important. Sunday, September 29th would have been 2 weeks ago. I showed up to church when no one expected me to. And some people even wanted to encourage me to go home. But the fact is that I needed to come to church, I needed to worship, and I needed to be here. I had people with my mother. She had her doctors. But something I needed, I couldn't find in a hospital. Y'all remember how that service went. It wasn't horrible, but it was very emotional. But I didn't come out of obligation. I came because I really did need it. Last Sunday, I forget the date because I didn't write it down, but I took my once every 3-year vacation day, and I went with my mother and my aunt to what I consider to be my home church, and we were there for homecoming. And that was a significant event for me, something I wanted to do because it was the last time that, or the last church where all 3 of my family members and even more of the extended family all sat in a single church together. And it's not because anyone got mad or anyone got upset about the carpet or anything like that. Most of my immediate family will follow the will of God, even if it meant that at first my father was at one church, me and my mother were at at the same church, and then I moved to this church, and then we all had very conflicting schedules. Which, by the way, the vacation day every 3 years is a joke, but it's not really, because I only really miss a service about every 3 years. I just took it in the beginning of the 3 years instead of at the end of the 3 years this time. So I'm done until 2021, I think. So sorry, that time I was making sure I was muted. So, as I've completely gotten out of order of everything I was wanting to say at this little beginning thing, I'm going to, I promise, write a card in the old-fashioned Baptist way that says, "Thank you to the church for everything. I'm just a slow writer, and sometimes it's still kind of hard to recount it, as you can tell." And like I said, in the past 2 weeks, which by my biological internal clock has felt more like a month, I've learned a lot. But it's impossible for me to tell you what I have learned in 2 weeks in 30 to 45 minutes. Probably more like 45 to all afternoon. But before we get started this morning, I have to learn how to open a pack cards. I thought I unsealed them already, but apparently they have another seal that is probably not child-proof, but it at least is adult-proof. A lot of pastors like to use illustrations when they do sermons. It's actually a really intelligent way, because where some people can listen and learn, some people need to visually learn. And I'll be taking the 2 jokers out of the deck because they may add less significance than what I'm thinking. But this, if you couldn't tell by me trying to open the pack, is a brand new pack of cards. Every single one of them in the standard order that they are sent in. Does that matter? Not a bit. But just wanted to say it. Another thing I've learned this week, it's not that I talk with my hands. It's that I cannot talk without my hands. Because as we stood at Henderson and Sons, I called it Henderson and Fraser yesterday, and we're attempting to we were attempting to pick out a casket for my father. I was trying to explain why I thought one casket was better than the other, why this one, that one, but I was holding, it was actually a glass, but I was holding a glass in my hand trying to explain, and I said, "Mother, can you hold this for just a second?" So she takes my glass and take it. So then I could point, use hands, do whatever I needed to do with my fingers and my arms, finally say what I wanted to say, and then I could take the glass back. But without that, I couldn't, for the life of me, explain myself. I don't know if that is a learned behavior or what. I'm told that it's actually a bad behavior because you're distracting people from what you're actually saying. I apparently cannot help it. So, some cool facts about a deck of cards. The factorial of 52, which there are 52 cards and a standard deck. And a factorial is basically, if you know games like poker and everything, it's counting cards. The chances of, if so many of some cards are out on the table, and you know it's one deck, you kind of have a general idea of the odds of what card comes next. It is a mathematical way of saying that, or a mathematical way of showing the number of possible variations there are in the way that a deck can come out. Like, I could flip this over and get king, 8, 3, and 2. Now, supposedly, unless I'm trying to do a magic trick and trying to fool you by keeping certain cards on the top, if I thoroughly shuffle it, I get 7, 5, 6, and 4. Mind you, these haven't been shuffled very much, so some of the suits are still kind of sticking together, and because I'm bad at it. But a number I want to share is the factorial of 52. 8.0658 times 10 to the 67th. Mathematically speaking, that's huge. And so mathematically speaking that if you open a deck of cards and are not trying to keep certain cards in a certain order, every time you shuffle it and you put out card by card and try to tell what order they come in, it has 1 versus 8.0658 times 10 to the 67th chance of being the exact same sequence. To put this in perspective, according to modern science, the age of the visible universe, which visible means of what we can see, is 1 to the 10th, or 1 times 10 to the 18th seconds old. So if I could shuffle, deal all of this in 1 second from the beginning of time, by what scientists will call it, I would still not quite have made a dent in the number of factorials that are in here. And I would ask you to raise your hand, but I really don't want to know the answer, but I'm sure somebody's wondering, what in the world does this have to do with anything? It's okay, this is usually the way it starts out. But something I realized about that is, as huge of a number that is, it actually, I don't care about how old they think the universe is. God said in the beginning he created, and then all of what he did. I could really care less if God started the universe, waited a week, and then started us, or what kind of time frame was in there. I know that I was created by God. I know I was created in his image. So it's cool that we think that's how old the universe is, but it doesn't really matter to me. What does matter to me is that, kind of like playing a game of cards, when you are dealt into a game, depending on what game it is, you're given a hand of cards. I'll have you know, I am no pro at doing cards. I was kind of hoping that either Katie or Josh would be here today, but they too have been having family issues, because her laughter at this statement would make it seem more valid, but last year at Christmas, we played a few card games just for fun. No gambling involved, so no one get offended. But I've never been that much into cards, so I really didn't know what I was working with. I could have been holding 5 aces in a deck that only had 4 aces, and I still would be completely oblivious. So much to the point that Josh actually looked over after he had been knocked out of the game and said, "What kind of cards do you have?" And he looked. He's like, "You really don't know what you're doing." I'm like, "I told you I don't know. I don't know the value. I don't know the little tricks, the 7 high, or not 7 high, but the aces are high or low and all that. I didn't learn all that stuff." But it turns out life is a lot like a deck of cards. And when you start life, you end up with a deck and you get dealt a few cards. And those are your cards that go along with you. And sometimes, if you're like me, you may be completely oblivious as to how bad of a hand you have. Or sometimes, you may have the game-winning hand, but you got to know what to do with it. So, in addition to the words in Memoriam, I wanted to either call this What Love Feels Like. I kind of debated on what's love got to do with it, but it didn't carry across the exact same tone, and I've also used that before, so I had to get creative. So, if you want to turn to those 2 scriptures, I'm sorry I did not have time, or else I would have put them on the board so we would all be reading, or I'll at least see what I'm reading, but I ran out of time. So, I'm going to go ahead and sort of open up in a prayer that may seem a little bit backwards from being a few slides into the sermon, but this is where the prayer goes. Thank you, Lord, this morning. Thank you that we have an opportunity to come together to worship, to praise, even when we have things going on in our lives that we can't get through on our own, even when we're facing things that are destroying us inside and challenging us every single moment to keep a straight face. You take all those things, Lord. You take them away. Not to remove us from harm, but to comfort us in the middle of it. To protect us. To show that you are God not only in good, but you are God in the bad, in the storm. When we're at the end of the rope, there's still you. And Lord, through my babbling, through everything that I may say this morning, the things that you have shown me, let me somehow see them pass from me to those that are in this congregation this morning, Lord. It's not by chance that people are here. It is not by chance that certain people hear a certain service. But Lord, it is all to your glory. and it means something to the ears that it lands at. Be with me and help me to remain firm and remain strong in the things that I say. In Christ's name, amen. So, these scriptures, the first one, 1 Corinthians 13:13. Even if you were not a Christian, if you have never darkened the doors of the church, you may have seen this one on a bereavement card. 1 Corinthians 13:13, and by the way, I read out of NIV, so words may be a little bit different, but the concept remains the same. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. That second passage comes from Matthew 22:37 through 40, and to provide a little bit of background, this is when Jesus is being questioned, not by Pharisees, but he's being questioned by people that are trying to learn. And the person prior to this asked, "What is the greatest commandment?" Jesus replies to him and says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Now I'm skipping 40 for just a second. Both of these scriptures talk about love. First one is Apostle Paul talking to the church at Corinth. The second is the words of Jesus. And they both undeniably put emphasis on the word love. The very beginning of the passage in Matthew says, "Love the Lord your God with everything." The passage in Corinthians says, "Faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love." So, in the New Testament, you can find countless times where Jesus says, "Love one another." Love your friends. Love your enemies. Love one another. Now, the context of Matthew 22, the question being asked by the young man, older man, it kind of depends because life expectancy was a little bit different back then. He asked Jesus a rather broad question. What is the greatest commandment? And a lot of times when we think about the law, we think about the 10 Commandments. But if you want to equate it to what it is in the American justice system, the 10 Commandments are more like the Bill of Rights. It's those first kind of 10 statements that are the big ones intended to hold everything together. But what this man is also asking is about the entire book of Leviticus. If you've ever read through Leviticus and tried to keep in mind all of the things that people were responsible for keeping, you would go crazy. It's about like trying to do taxes, trying to do insurance, and trying to do every single bill, paper that comes in. And this is just your spiritual life. But this man that came up to Jesus wanted him to take not only the 10 Commandments, but every commandment that had been put into place and sum them up into one. He wanted the Cliff Note version of Leviticus. And Jesus said to him, love the Lord your God with everything. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. The reason I said we were skipping verse 40 is because I want to add it here. Verse 40, after this statement, he says, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So, what does that mean? What does it mean that everything hangs on these two commandments? It means if you can keep these two commandments truly to the letter of the law that they state, you will satisfy the entire law. Keeping these two commandments make the rest of the law come naturally. If you love your brother, you will not kill him. If you love your brother, you will not steal from him. You will not commit adultery with another because it harms them. Not only does it go against what God says, but it also harms your fellow brother. The next verse, Corinthians 13:13, or 1 Corinthians 13:13, excuse me. These three things remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Paul wasn't there when Jesus spoke this message, but he got it down the line. If you have faith and you have hope in God, you do good, but if you do not have love, the other two don't matter, because love is the greater of the three. It holds them all together. There's a verse that says, how can you love a brother or a sister who you have seen? Or how can you not love a brother who you have seen, but say you love God? Saying, if you can't love those around you, those people that you can tangibly see, how can you love God whom you have not seen? It even goes so far to say the language that if you say that you love God, but you do not love a brother or a sister who you have seen, you are a liar. Because how can you love God if you cannot love those around you? This next part brings up a phrase that, well, I'll let you see. You may have heard somebody say it before. You may have heard it in passing. I love you, but I don't have to like you. Or, I love you, but that doesn't mean I gotta like you. That phrase right there, no matter how you grammatically put it, is Satan. You say, I love you, but you don't like them. Why don't you like them? What small part of them do you find repulsive? In the book of Genesis, while talking about Joshua when he is in the Pharaoh's court and becomes second in command to the Pharaoh at the time, it kind of makes an aside note to the culture of the people of that time. And it said that Joseph ate apart from his brothers, the Israelites. And it says, because to eat in their presence is an abomination, or is abominable. And that may seem a weird word, but Hebrew translations typically have shades of color to them depending on how they are used and how they are said. But basically, in this situation, the word is more repulsive. The Egyptians did not eat in the presence of the Israelites because they found it repulsive. They found it disgusting. Because they thought they were higher and loftier than sheep herders. I guarantee you, the Israelites, as sheep herders, probably did not smell great. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we sometimes apparently find people so disgusting, so repulsive to ourselves, that we love them, but we don't like them. So, what's making you only like someone? Do they smell? Do they speak, in ways that you don't? Is their language coarse, perhaps inappropriate at times? Is it their looks? Are they covered in tattoos or have a look about them that they look like they're from a rough crowd, as some people put it? Is it their attitude in life? The way they talk to others? What's letting you love somebody? And I put that in quotations or italics. What's letting you love someone, but you don't like them? If you want to, go ahead and turn to Luke 6:32 through 36. I'm not going to read it immediately, but I know sometimes a pastor will jump up here and say, I want you to find these 3 verses, and by the time he says the last one, he's reading the first one. I know that because sometimes I'm coming off stage after worship, and I can barely get a Bible into my hand before we're reading. Which, I'm not saying anything against our pastor. I'm just saying that it's difficult switching modes. So, I go back to my little tray over here, stool. And I said, in life, we're handed cards. Sorry. This part's called In Memoriam because I want to mention a little bit about my father. To my knowledge, very few people, if anyone in this church, actually really ever met my father and talked to him at any extended period. I know everyone has prayed for him. I know everyone has thought about him, sent letters, sent flowers, but very few people actually knew my father. And to the best of my ability, I'm going to read out, from my point of view, 5 things. As a child, my father was abused. Scientifically, if you know that a child abused will often become an abuser to their children. My father stepped out of disciplining me as we grew up because he did not want what had happened to him pass on to me. Something I learned the other day was he loved that movie called I Can Only Imagine, which movie about Mercy B's kind of big hit called I Can Only Imagine. And the story was the lead singer had been abused when he was growing up. But my father, he couldn't watch that part. He had to start from, and I'm sorry if you haven't seen it, I'm going to kind of spoil it. There's a part in the movie where the father gets sick. And he could start watching it there, but he couldn't go beforehand. Number 2, at the age I am, which I'm about a week or so away from being 32, if it really matters. But at that age, my father had a incident where he was stressed out, pushed beyond his limits, and he so happened to have the genetic predisposition to become bipolar. That event caused him to develop the manic tendencies. You can kind of tell better if I show it to you. The third one is something that exacerbated everything. His body was very quick to become immune or highly intolerant of medicine. His doctor could put him on some of the hardest psychological medicines, the highest sleep medicines that were. It might last a year or it might last 6 months. And what would happen was sometimes in attempts to fix it, in attempts to give him peace of mind and give him hope and help, his doctor would prescribe him some of the toughest stuff at the highest dosage you can legally give someone. So he would become, on some days, nothing more than someone sleeping in a chair the entire day long. He'd get up, eat, and then he would go back to bed. Or the opposite end of it was that when the meds suddenly would stop working, he would be as though a bipolar without treatment. And I know media and everything has made mental diseases a lot more prevalent these days, but if you don't know what bipolar is, it's a tendency to go towards the poles very quickly. You can go from fine to screaming and crying for no reason. You can go to anger, fear, any extreme of an emotion. A few years back, it was at least within the time that I've been here, my father developed diabetes. For those of you that have dealt with diabetes or know someone that has diabetes, you know that if the sugar level gets off, it is not only dangerous, but it can cause mood swings as well and cause a great deal of pain and suffering if untreated. It was also around this time that we learned that the heavy psychotic medication that was given to him to attempt to bring him to normal, the massive doses and the need for constantly new ones had caused him to have cirrhosis of the liver. So, along with everything else not working, there was that. And his body began to not process food correctly. If you've ever had one of those times where the doctor says fasting, no eating after a certain time. If he was told not to eat at 12 a.m. at night and his appointment was at 8 a.m. that morning, he would still have food in his stomach because he was not processing it. And you know, food turns to sugar. And sometimes, in order to help a diabetic, you give them something to raise their sugar. And we would do that. But we didn't know that his stomach, taking the food he had and was processing it, would still be processing, but yet we would give him insulin to try to help his current condition, but then the food would process and it would take his sugar to dangerous levels. And the final one I kind of touched on already was cirrhosis. Strong meds, all of it, did irreparable damage to his liver. The biggest problem with this being that he was on the highest limit of drugs that you could have. But the problem would be that he would take one of these medicines at night, sleeping pill that was supposed to help him go to sleep. And he'd be up all night. Next morning, or next evening, we gave him the same pill, and he was up all night. And then the third day, he would sleep all day. And the reason is his body would not process it at the proper time. It would be stuck in his liver until the liver suddenly decided to release what it should have released in most of our bodies a few hours after taking it. It would take days worth of medication and send it through his system at once. So, even back when my father had difficulty dealing with his own emotions because the medications would dry out and stop working, it became even more rapid swings to either being zombie-ish to it not working. There were times where helping my father was not was difficult. There were times where, because the attitude I would feel towards people, I would resent them. I wouldn't want to help. He had a lot of friends over the course of his life, but sometimes he would lose them because on a day, just like any other day, he could go in and suddenly become irate and angry with a person enough to that person say, "Don't come back." But life gives you a deck of cards. You have 5 of them. You don't necessarily get to choose what they are. Luke 6:32 through 36. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to them? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those whom you would expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them. And lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great. And you will be children of the Most High. Because He is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father has been merciful. The culture we live in likes to say, if you don't agree with someone, if they don't like you, if you don't like them, if they're, the word they use is toxic in your life, that you shut them out of your life. You say, we're done. And I lived with my father for nearly 32 years. And from the outside looking in, some might say that I had a right to leave. My father is not my enemy. ever was. The person that you love but you don't like, they're not your enemy either. Culture wants to tell us that if we don't work with somebody well, that we just go up and leave them. And my final question is, why does that matter? Why have I stood up here for however long it's been and tell you stories with tears in my eyes, or occasionally trying to make jokes to cause myself to not focus? The reason it matters, particularly Matthew 22:40. All of the law and the prophets hinge on these two. Hinge on what? They hinge on love. 1 Corinthians 16:14. Do everything in love. 1 John 4:7-10. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Satan is really clever. He's much smarter than any human because he is not human, and he's also had the benefit of experience. Our society has spent the better part of the past 50, 60, 70 years redefining what loving someone is. We see evil around us that we can't explain where it came from. And Satan has taken other types of love and twisted them into love that we don't recognize. In the last days, the love of many will grow cold. People don't love God, and the people that say they love God don't love people. Finally, 1 John 4:20. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. Whoever does not love their brother and sister who they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Whoever claims to love God yet doesn't like a brother or sister is a liar. The generation we are living in say that you have a right to not love someone. You have a right to remove them from your life. And I agree. You do. You have that right. But if you say that is your right, then do not say you love God. Because if you choose to have the right to remove someone from your life and not love them, not like them, then God will call you and everyone else that does that a liar. Satan has done a great job at dividing the people of God, and he's done a great job dividing all of humanity. The people that need God the most, that need to hear the gospel, don't hear it. And then the people that know God, that were intended to share his love, don't love people enough to go out and say, we love you. And not just a hug on the neck as they leave church, or a hug on the neck as you see somebody you haven't seen in a while, but actually honest to God, loving someone enough that it breaks you, help them. I missed a verse that I'd like to mention. It's John 13:35, and don't worry about flipping over there. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Satan has been around for longer than we have. There's no need to cause chaos in the world by running around the room and kicking over a chair, breaking a window, pulling down a TV, unplugging a computer. All the law hinges on these statements. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Satan didn't have to destroy anything but love. And you can watch the news today, you can read in the paper, you can go on the internet, wherever you want to. You'll find articles of people or hate groups that either say they hate someone or they are against another group because they feel hated. A lot of it's not true. A lot of it is people sensationalizing evil. But it is driving a wedge deeper and deeper in between the people of God and those that need God. God left us as ministers to the lost. We have to stop looking at somebody's circumstances, someone's life. We can't look at their condition to determine if they should be loved. The story of the Good Samaritan tells the tale of 3 people that passed by a man. The first 2 were, per se, profoundly religious of the time. But they didn't want anything to do with him because one of them thought they were dead, and the other one didn't want to be near the person. But that person, who was a Jew, is helped by someone that hated other Jews. He was helped by a Samaritan. Samaritans and Jews did not get along. He helped him. He put him up in an inn with the instructions to take care of him while he was gone. And that when he returned again that way, he would pay in full the debt that was owed. A person's condition nor sin should stop love. Jesus found a man in a graveyard, naked and possessed of a demon, and he helped him. How many of us would walk into a graveyard, see someone undressed, ranting and raving and keeping around tombs, would want to help him? Jesus found a woman at a well who had had multiple adulterous relationships, and he helped her. And Jesus took every soul ever to exist, every crime, every blemish, and lifted every sin ever to exist on a cross, and saved everyone. Kind of in closing, I want to read a song, or at least parts of a song that was mentioned previously in one of the sections. It's by an artist named Toby Mac, and the song is called What Love Feels Like. I am tired, I am drained, but the fight in me remains. I am weary, I am worn, like I've never been before. This is harder than I thought. Harder than I thought it'd be. Harder than I thought, taking every part of me. Harder than I thought, so much harder than I thought it'd be. But empty, never felt so full. Poured out, used up, still giving, stretching me out to the end of my limits. This is what love, this is what real love feels like. And the second verse of the song says, in the depths of the trenches are the richest of richest. Love is calling us to more. We will be known by our love or our lack thereof. Sometimes we want to divide people and say, well, they're sinning, or they are sinners. But we'll say ourselves that we are sinners, but we won't open up to them. Jesus sat on the side of a well and talked to a woman that not only their nationalities didn't agree, but he knew every sin she had committed, but chose to sit beside her and offer her the same salvation that he offered every single person he encountered. We have to see with eyes of God. We have to love till it hurts. And then when we're poured out, we still have to keep giving.